Ex-Navy SEAL single dad janitor is humiliated by 3 millionaires. What he does next shocks them all. Before we begin, just know, no matter where you are in the world, I'm glad you're here. There are men who walk into a room and own it. You know the type. The tailored suit, the firm handshake, the voice that fills corners without being invited. The ones who laugh too loud at their own jokes and expect everyone to laugh along, because that is the social contract they have always operated under, and it has never once failed them. They buy rooms. They rent attention. They mistake admiration for respect and will never understand the difference, because the difference has never cost them a single thing. Then there are the other men, the ones who enter through the service door with a badge clipped to a shirt washed so many times the fabric has forgotten its original color. The ones who push a mop cart through a service corridor like it is the most natural thing in the world, because for them, it is. Not because life cornered them into it, but because they made choices, deliberate choices that carried real weight. And this is what those choices look like on a Tuesday night in the service hallway of a hotel, where the flower arrangements alone cost more than a month of their rent. Marcus Cole was one of the other men. He was 35 years old, 6 feet even, built like a man who had once needed his body the way a craftsman needs his tools, functional, reliable, carefully maintained, and had kept those habits long after the circumstances requiring them had officially concluded. His hands were calloused in places that had nothing to do with cleaning floors. His posture was the kind that does not come from good intentions. It comes from years of someone drilling it into you until standing any other way feels structurally wrong. He moved through space with an economy of motion that could easily be mistaken for passivity by anyone not paying close attention. Most people were not paying close attention. Most people never are, and he had long since stopped being surprised by that particular truth about the world. His face was calm, always calm. Not the calm of a man without burdens. He had burdens, real ones, the kind that do not leave when you clock into a job. Not the empty stillness of someone who has stopped caring about the outcome. The calm of a man who had learned at genuine cost that panic was a luxury he could never afford, and that stillness, absolute, chosen, deliberate stillness, was one of the most formidable things a human being could bring into a difficult room. He had been in very difficult rooms before. This ballroom was not the most challenging environment he had ever been required to function inside of. He pushed his cart through the service hallway of the Hale Grand Hotel, past stacked crates of champagne and towers of rented crystal glasses wrapped in white cloth, past two-line cooks arguing in low voices about a missing tray and a sous chef on his phone, managing something that had gone sideways in the kitchen. Marcus nodded at none of them. He had learned, in environments far more consequential than this one, that invisibility was not humiliation. It was not defeat. It was geometry. You positioned yourself in the spaces others never thought to look, and from those spaces, you could see everything clearly. The Hale Grand Gala was the event of the season. That is what the banners said. Victor Hale, third-generation heir to a shipping and logistics empire, known in roughly equal measure for his publicly performed philanthropy and his capacity for cold, precise cruelty toward people who could not fight back, had rented out the entire ballroom floor of the hotel for what the embossed invitations described as a celebration of excellence. Marcus had read those exact words on a card someone had left on a bathroom counter without a second thought, the way people discard things that cost them nothing. He had not been invited to celebrate anything. He had been contracted by a cleaning service at $14.75 an hour to maintain the premises before, during, and after the event. He had been on shift since 4 in the afternoon. He had eaten a protein bar in the parking structure at 6:15 and had not stopped moving since. He placed his cart near the east corridor, where the steady flow of foot traffic between the ballroom and the garden terrace guaranteed consistent work. 3 weeks on this property had given him the full layout by heart. He knew which floor drains ran slow in the northeast corner, which marble tiles near the main entrance had uneven joints that caught the tips of women's heels, which fire exit on the east wall had a latch requiring a specific angle of pressure to operate cleanly, a latch that would present a significant problem if genuine urgency ever actually materialized. He noted these things the way he noted all environmental information, automatically without deliberation, without any mechanism for stopping. Cataloging spaces was not a skill Marcus Cole had developed by choice. It had been installed in him by people and circumstances that no longer appeared on any public record, in a chapter of his life that existed on no resume he had ever submitted to anyone. It did not switch off because the space in question was a hotel ballroom rather than somewhere else entirely. It never switched off. He had long since stopped expecting it to. In the corner of the service alcove, seated on a folded jacket Marcus had placed atop a storage crate before his first circuit of the floor, was Eli, 7 years old. Dark eyes carrying his father's quality of watchful stillness, eyes that conducted a complete inventory of a room before committing to any expression. He was bent over his spiral notebook with a short pencil, drawing with the focused gravity of someone engaged in work that genuinely mattered. Eli always treated drawing that way. It had stakes. It required full attention and full commitment, the same kind his father brought to everything he did. In every room he had ever been required to enter. Marcus had not planned to bring his son tonight. The plan had been Mrs. Pacheco from the apartment next door, warm, reliable, available on short notice. That plan ended at 4:14 in the afternoon when she called about her daughter's early labor across town. The backup hadn't answered her phone. The backup to the backup didn't exist in any practical form. Marcus had stood in the kitchen of their small apartment with 40 minutes until his shift began, looking at his son sitting at the table eating crackers with the complete equanimity of someone for whom the world had always been a reliable place. Because Marcus had made it that way. "Looks like you're coming with me tonight," Marcus said. Eli considered the change in plans with appropriate gravity. "To the fancy place?" "Yeah." "Do I need different shoes?" "The shoes you have are fine." That had been the entire conversation, because when your whole world is built on one person's steadiness, you learn, without being taught, without needing it explained to you, to trust the shape of that steadiness even when everything around it changes completely. Marcus paused at the alcove doorway on his way to the floor. "Staying put?" Eli looked up briefly. "Yeah, Dad. Need anything?" "I'm good." He returned to his drawing. Then, without lifting his head, "There's gonna be a lot of people here tonight, huh?" "Yeah." "Famous ones?" "Rich ones." The boy processed the distinction with the deliberate patience of someone who did not rush past important questions. "Is that the same thing?" Marcus looked at his son for exactly 1 measured second. "Not even close," he said quietly, and moved back to his cart. The ballroom was filling now. Women in gowns that started at 4 figures and climbed considerably higher. Men in suits collected from shops with single names and no visible prices in the window. The chandeliers above scattered light in every direction. Cold and brilliant, the way something beautiful does when it has been shattered precisely and the result has been designated as art. Marcus collected a toppled cocktail glass from the edge of a table, replaced 2 napkins that had fallen to the floor, removed a small heel smear from the leg of a chair. He was on his second pass near the north corner when he heard the voices. 3 women, late 20s to early 30s. The unself-conscious confidence of people who had spent their entire lives having their presence treated as an event worth organizing around. They wore wealth not as display but as default state, which was far more impenetrable than display. Display could at least be criticized. Default simply was what it was. He did not look up on the approach. "Is this seriously the help situation they've put together for tonight?" Dry, bright, an accent softened by expensive rooms and expensive schools. "I counted at least 4 of them just wandering around." "It's giving hospital cafeteria." 2 of the 3 laughed. Marcus kept moving, his face unchanged, using the long-handled tool to collect a swizzle stick from beneath a cocktail table and deposit it in the collection bag with the deliberate, unhurried precision of a man who has already made his decision about exactly how much of the world's ambient noise he intends to let all the way in. "That one near the corner looks like he's positioning himself to mop up something tragic." The second voice, lighter, aimed, the kind that always expected a constant audience. He was less than 3 feet away. "Sir." The first voice now aimed directly at him with quiet precision. Not loud. People who are truly confident rarely need volume. "Sir, there is a smudge on that table leg. Can you handle that, please? Or is that above your pay grade?" The third woman made a sound behind her hand, something between a gasp and a laugh. Marcus stopped. He looked at the table leg. There was a smudge, a heel mark, black rubber on pale cream lacquer. He removed it in 2 strokes of his cloth. He straightened and looked at the woman who had spoken. Early 30s. The kind of beautiful that has been maintained and curated for so long, it no longer requires conscious effort. Champagne flute raised slightly, not to drink from but to have something to hold while the world performed around her. Her eyes were direct and entirely flat, with the specific flatness of someone for whom other people had never quite managed to achieve the level of genuine consideration. "Thank you," she said, in a tone that contained none of the meaning those words were built to carry. Marcus nodded once, turned back to his cart. "God," she said, volume entirely unchanged as if he had already exited the building. "Can you imagine doing this every single night? For a living?" He heard every word. And in the service alcove at the east end of the corridor, a 7-year-old boy with his father's eyes had stopped moving his pencil across the page. The work didn't stop. That was the thing most people never truly understood about this kind of labor, the kind with a card and a badge and no applause at the end of it. It had no interval, no break, no acknowledged moment of completion. While the guests moved from one conversation to the next with the easy, unhurried motion of people who believed that every room they entered had been prepared for them specifically, which, in a practical sense, it had been. Marcus moved too, quietly, continuously, the way water moves in a pipe, the way time moves through a long night, without announcement, without being asked. He replaced a cocktail napkin dispenser near the south bar. He collected 3 dessert forks from the floor near the harp, forks that had slid from plates held at angles by people more interested in their conversations than in basic physics. He wiped a section of the east balustrade where someone had set a plate without looking and left a ring the color of rust. Nobody thanked him. Nobody looked long enough to form a complete impression of him as a person in possession of an interior life. He was, in the language of this particular evening, infrastructure. He had made a kind of peace with that, or had assembled something that served the same function, which is not always the same thing, but which works well enough on a daily basis when the alternative is carrying it as permanent weight. The gala moved into its second hour with the smooth, well-funded momentum of events planned by people who understood that the impression of effortless elegance required enormous invisible effort. The speeches started. Victor Hale at the microphone, square-shouldered, composed, the physical presence of a man who had spent enough years being agreed with that disagreement had become physiologically uncomfortable for him. He spoke about excellence, about the obligation of builders, about the responsibility of those given much. He used the word community 4 times in 8 minutes in the practiced way of people who have learned that certain words resonate without requiring much personal examination of what those words actually ask of a person in practice. He spoke about legacy, about forward momentum, about the next generation of leaders standing on foundations that people like him had built through decades of disciplined effort and clear moral purpose. Marcus was 15 feet to the speaker's right, running a cloth along the baseboard behind the secondary bar station. He did not listen to the speech the way you listen when you're interested. He listened to the room, the whole room, simultaneously. Old habit. The kind that becomes reflex after enough years. That the nervous system absorbs so completely, the mind stops tracking it as a deliberate choice. 2 of the 4 exits were partially obstructed by equipment that should have been cleared before the event. The head of private security, a broad man in an earpiece who moved with the ease of someone who had spent years being large in rooms where large was sufficient, was stationed at the wrong entrance. The southwest approach, which was the tactically significant one, was completely unmonitored. 3 catering staff were gathered near the kitchen corridor, leaving the west hallway open and unobserved. The HVAC system on the north side of the room was running harder than the south. In a smoke situation, the differential would push people toward the windows rather than toward the exits. Marcus filed all of it away the way a man files the weather, not because he intended to use the information, because his mind was constitutionally incapable of moving through a space and failing to read it completely. He came back to the alcove at 8:47. Eli had finished one drawing and started another. The first was visible at the corner of the notebook page, a detailed rendering of the ballroom chandelier, done with the close, careful observation of someone working directly from life. Eli drew what he actually saw, which meant the chandelier in the drawing was slightly off-center, because the chandelier in the room was slightly off-center, though no other person present that evening had thought to notice that fact, or to care about it. "Getting hungry?" Marcus asked. "Not yet. Turkey sandwich in the cart. I'll eat it in a minute. In about 40 minutes you're going to be hungry and tired at the same time. That combination makes you difficult." Eli looked up with the expression of someone who has been unfairly characterized and intends to say so. "I'm not difficult. I'm particular." Marcus looked at his son for a moment. The tightness in his chest that appeared sometimes. Not exactly pain, but the awareness of what you have to lose. The feeling that precedes both, arrived quietly and without announcement, the way it always did. "Where'd you pick up particular?" he asked. "Mrs. Pacheco says it about her cat when it won't eat the store-brand food." He passed the sandwich across. Eli received it with the deliberate formality of a person completing a transaction of some importance. They ate without speaking. Not uncomfortable silence, but the easy silence of two people who had long ago established that they didn't need words to occupy the same space together. The string quartet on the other side of the wall played something low and continental. $300,000 worth of imported flowers turned the air heavy and sweet. In the service alcove, they ate turkey sandwiches from foil wrappers. This was their life. The two of them. Table for two in whatever corner happened to fit. There was a particular quality to the silence between them that Marcus had come to know completely over 4 years of single parenthood. The silence of two people who had decided. Without ever discussing it, that presence itself was the communication that mattered most. Eli looked at his drawing and Marcus stood near his cart, and they occupied the same space in the way that people occupy the same space when they have come through difficult things together and found something on the other side that required no explanation and no translation. Eli did not ask why they ate in a service alcove while 300 other people ate at tables covered in linen. He understood, in the way children understand things long before they have the vocabulary for them, that his father was a man who carried more than what was visible, and that the carrying was not weakness, and that watching how a man carried what he carried was one of the most important things a son could ever do. There had been a third person in the shape of their life, Emily, Marcus's wife, Eli's mother. 31 years old when a man who had run 3 consecutive red lights ran a 4th one that had permanent consequences. She had been coming home from the grocery store. She had bought his crackers, the ones with rosemary that he always forgot to put on the list, assuming she would remember, because she always did, every single time. The crackers were in the bag on the passenger seat when the ambulance arrived. A police officer mentioned the crackers as context, the way people reach for small, specific details to fill the space around the thing that cannot be described directly. Marcus had thanked the officer. He had signed what needed to be signed. He had driven home within the speed limit and sat down in the kitchen and did not move for a very long time. Eli had been 3 years old, young enough that memory with scenes and edges and lighting had nowhere yet to anchor itself, old enough that the absence had a shape he could feel without being able to name it correctly. He knew his mother through the way his father occasionally went still in the middle of a sentence, through old photographs kept in a specific drawer, through the particular way Marcus sometimes looked at him, as if he was looking at 2 people simultaneously, and had to look carefully away. 4 years of this. Marcus Cole, working every job that paid consistently and didn't require extensive discussion of a stretch of his employment history that appeared on no resume he had ever submitted to anyone in any civilian context. Security consulting for 8 months. Good money. Impossible hours for a man raising a child alone with no support structure. Construction flagging for a summer, honest and physical. Dispatch work. And for the past 14 months, commercial cleaning. It was honest work. It kept the rent paid and Eli's after-school program funded and the lights on and the refrigerator stocked. It was a life built with both hands in the dark, without a margin for error, and Marcus did not resent it. He had chosen what mattered most to him. This was what that choice looked like in practice, every single day. The second incident with Victor Hale happened at 9:11 p.m. Marcus noted the time with the automatic precision of a man for whom time had always been tactical information, the kind you could not afford to be casual about. Hale crossed the floor toward him with two associates trailing in his orbit, moving with the particular confident gravity of a man who had spent enough years being the most important person in every room he entered that the habit had become genuinely indistinguishable from his actual character. He stopped at the distance of a man who expected the space between himself and the person he was addressing to function as a visible statement about their relative positions in the world. "The floor near the fountain," Hale said. He was looking past Marcus's left shoulder at something in the middle distance, as if the conversation required less than his full attention. "Something sticky there. It has been there for at least 20 minutes. I'll get right to it, sir. You'll get to it now." A pause with deliberately constructed weight inside it. "That is what you are here for." The associate to Hale's right looked at the floor. The associate to his left found something suddenly urgent on his phone. "Yes, sir," Marcus said, and went to clean the floor near the fountain. In the alcove, Eli had put down his sandwich. He was watching the room with those steady, dark, inventory-taking eyes that absorbed considerably more than they ever returned. Marcus could feel the boy watching, the same way he had always been able to feel things he was not looking at directly. It was one of his oldest operational habits, and his most reliable. He moved through the rest of the floor carrying the quiet, steady weight of his son's attention, and he treated that weight the way he treated everything, as something to be worthy of, not merely to endure. There is a kind of humiliation that does not announce itself. It doesn't shout or swing or make a scene. It arrives as a gesture, 2 fingers, a particular tone of voice, a pause that has been deliberately weighted with meaning. It is delivered with the calm confidence of someone who has never, in the full arc of their entire life, been told no by anything that genuinely mattered to them. It is so clean and so practiced and so entirely without drama that the man receiving it has almost no vocabulary for what just happened to him. And that, of course, is precisely the point. Marcus had known louder things than this. He had known moments that rewrote a man from the inside out, not theatrical moments, not the kind that anyone makes films about, but the quiet, specific, irrevocable kind that leave marks which never fully stop being present. Those marks had hardened long ago into something that no longer bled. And compared to what it had taken to arrive at that hardness, Victor Hale's contempt was almost gentle. Almost. But Eli was watching. That was the difference. That was always the difference. And Marcus had not fully calculated its weight until this particular Tuesday night. A man absorbing something in private, packing it down, filing it away, converting it into the compressed material of experience, is one kind of physics. A man absorbing something while his son watches him do it is a completely different equation. Because what he accepts without objection, the boy absorbs as instruction. What he bends to without reply, the boy catalogs as the correct shape of a man under pressure. The education a father gives his son does not live primarily in the words he says. It lives in what he does when something costs him something real. Marcus cleaned the floor near the fountain with the same care he brought to everything. Methodical. Complete. No resentment carried in the motion. He did it because it was his job, and he did his job the way he had been trained to do all things, fully, without half measures, or not at all. That consistency was one of the few things he had preserved intact from a chapter of his life that was officially closed and had no forwarding address. Its lessons had been built into him below the level of choice. They remained. When he returned to his cart, he glanced toward the alcove. Eli was drawing, the pencil was moving, but his eyes lifted once, briefly, with the quick, checking precision of someone verifying a position. Dark eyes, his mother's shape and his father's quality. The focused inventory-taking gaze of a child who was quietly and without assistance, building his complete model of what the world requires from a man. The 3 women had repositioned near the north end of the room, fresh drinks in hand, orbiting a conversation with 2 men whose suits communicated venture capital without quite stating it. The one Marcus had identified through overheard fragments of conversation as Cassandra Whitfield, connected to Hale through overlapping social and financial networks, was holding court in the way of someone for whom being listened to had never once, in her entire life, felt like a privilege rather than a given. She was good at rooms. He could see that plainly and acknowledge it without any remainder attached to the acknowledgement. Under different circumstances, he might have found that genuinely interesting. Under these circumstances, he pushed his cart toward the south quadrant and began collecting the debris left by the hors d'oeuvres service. The second incident with Cassandra Whitfield happened at 9:44 p.m. He was near the garden terrace door, collecting toothpicks, a crumpled cocktail napkin, the paper skirt from a canapé that someone had simply placed on the floor, as if the floor were the appropriate receptacle for things they no longer wanted, when the three women came through the doorway heading toward the terrace. Mid-conversation, champagne in hand, he stepped aside, instinct and courtesy operating simultaneously, the physics of a man in a service role creating space for people passing through. She stopped, not because she had nearly walked into him, though he was fully within her direct sightline and she had been focused on her phone with the complete, undivided attention some people give to devices and very rarely to actual rooms. She stopped because the moment presented itself to her as an opportunity, the way opportunities always present themselves to people who move through the world expecting it to perform for them on demand. "You have something on the wheel," she said, looking at his cart. "Tape or something wrapped around the front wheel there." He looked. A strip of blue painter's tape, left from a floor marker he had rolled through during the earlier setup pass, was still clinging to the base of the front wheel. He crouched and peeled it away cleanly. He stood. "You should really check your equipment before bringing it into a space like this," she said pleasantly. And that was the craftsmanship of it, the pleasantness. From across the room it had the complete shape and sound of helpful guidance. "This is a $400 a plate event. The details are the entire point of an evening like this." Her friend, the one with the short hair and the particular laugh, made a small sound of agreement that was specifically designed to be heard by everyone present. "You're right," Marcus said. Level, unhurried, quiet in the way that dense things are quiet when they have nothing to prove. "I'm just saying, the small things add up, you understand? It's nothing personal." She tilted her head slightly, the gesture of someone explaining something to someone they are not entirely confident can follow. "It's about the standard of the experience we're all here for." "Of course," Marcus said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who cannot quite determine whether she is being agreed with or carefully managed, and who finds the uncertainty faintly irritating. She could not resolve the question to her satisfaction. She moved on toward the terrace with her friends behind her. Marcus stood still. 3 seconds. Nothing visible changed on his face. No jaw set against itself. Nothing readable in the eyes from any distance. Just the stillness of a man running a complete calculation in the deep, trained infrastructure of a mind that had learned to remain fully functional under pressure. The stillness of someone who knows exactly what he is looking at and is making a deliberate, considered decision about what to do with what he sees. He turned back to his cart. Eli was standing in the entrance of the alcove. He had moved to the edge of his designated space. Marcus had been clear. "Stay in the alcove. Stay seated. Do not come to the main floor," and was standing with his spiral notebook held flat against his chest, like something he wanted to protect. Marcus walked to him. He crouched down to his son's level. "You moved," he said. "I wanted to see." "See what?" Eli met his eyes with the direct, genuine quality of a child asking something that actually and fully matters to him. "Why you didn't say anything back to her?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. The gala continued around them. 300 expensive lives moving simultaneously at full volume, none of them requiring anything from either of these two people standing still inside all of it. "Because my job was to hear what she said and do what needed doing," Marcus told him, "not to say everything I was thinking." "What were you thinking?" A pause. Then, "I was thinking about you." Eli held that carefully, the way he held most things his father gave him. Seriously, without rushing, giving it the weight it deserved. Then, "She didn't talk to you like you were a person." No. Why do people do that? They confuse what a man does for money with who that man actually is, Marcus said. It's an easy mistake to make when you've never been on the receiving end of it. Have you thought about it? The difference? Yes. From which side? Marcus looked at his son for a long moment. Both, he said simply. He straightened and put one hand briefly on top of Eli's head. Light, just a moment. The way you touch something you are grateful for without wanting to make a production of the gratitude. Back in the alcove, he said. Eli went without argument, without complaint. The same uncomplaining acceptance he had always shown for his father's direct instructions on matters of safety and position. Marcus returned to the floor. Victor Hale found the alcove at 10:08 p.m., accompanied by 2 associates, and discovered that an uninvited child was present on the premises of a private, secured event. He processed this discovery, the way powerful men process inconvenient discoveries, with a brief stillness that resolved itself quickly into motion and volume. Whose child is that? One of the catering supervisors pointed toward Marcus, who had already stopped moving. Hale crossed the distance without hurrying. He did not lower his voice. Lowering your voice was something you did as a concession to other people's comfort, and he had not built his career on concessions of that kind. You brought a child to a private event. My childcare fell through at the last moment. Sir, he has been completely contained in the back area. He hasn't left the... I'm not interested in your domestic situation. Hale's voice had the quality of something being stated for a permanent record. This is a secured private venue. Uninvited individuals represent a liability issue. I don't care about the circumstances. Inside these walls, that child is your problem to solve, not mine to accommodate. The nearest portion of the party had noticed. Heads had turned, some with the practiced, studied subtlety of people who were very interested and trying not to appear so, and some without bothering to pretend at all. I understand completely, sir. I can make sure he... I want him out of the building, said conversationally. The tone of a man who had never once in his adult life had to say something twice, and had stopped wondering why. Whatever arrangements you need to make, you make them on your own time. What happens with your agency and your contract is a conversation between you and them. I am telling you this exactly once. Are we clear? Marcus held Victor Hale's eyes for 7 full seconds. Not hostile, not submissive, not performing anything for the benefit of the watching room. The specific, difficult-to-classify expression of a man running a complete and careful assessment, taking in every relevant data point, assigning each its accurate weight, arriving at a measured conclusion about what he was looking at and what, if anything, it was worth doing with that information. Clear, he said. Hale turned and walked back to his guests. The associates turned and followed. The radius of attention around the exchange dissolved back into the general noise and motion of the evening. The way a small disturbance in water smooths itself over and disappears. Marcus walked to the alcove. Eli was sitting very straight on the storage crate, notebook in his lap, back held with a particular correctness. The way he sat when he was managing something internal, and had decided that the way to manage it was to hold himself very still. His eyes tracked his father all the way across the room and did not move from him until Marcus was standing directly in front of him. He said all of that out loud, Eli said. On purpose, so everybody could hear it. Yes. He wanted them to hear. Yes. Eli looked down at his notebook. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned the notebook around slowly, so his father could see what he had been drawing during the long minutes of the evening, during the incidents and the cleaning and the standing and the being spoken to and the walking away from it without saying what he was thinking. It was a figure in the center of a crowd. All the surrounding figures were turned away or looking past or occupied with other things entirely. The central figure stood straight, alone inside the crowd, outlined with the careful, observation-heavy precision that Eli brought to everything he drew from life, with the specific weight of someone who understood that seeing something accurately was the first form of respect you could pay it. Below the drawing, in the effortful block letters of a 7-year-old who had been working hard on his handwriting for most of the year, My dad. Marcus looked at the drawing for a long time. Long enough that the sound of the room receded the way sound does when something more important than noise arrives. long enough that the only thing in the world with any real weight was this small spiral-bound page, and the boy who had filled it quietly, during all the hours of the evening when the world had been looking somewhere else entirely. When he raised his eyes, they were steady. The way things are steady that have been tested all the way down to their deepest grain and found solid and sound throughout. "Come on," he said quietly. "I'll find you a better spot." He had begun moving the cart toward the secondary alcove near the East Service Hall, when the ballroom's east door opened at 10:19 p.m. in a way that doors are not supposed to open. Fast and hard and with the unmistakable specific physical vocabulary of purpose. And the evening became something else entirely. The door came open the way Marcus had seen doors come open before, in places and circumstances that no one in this ballroom would ever be able to picture, and most of them would not survive if they could. Fast, hard, with purpose written in every inch of the motion. Not the door of a man who was lost, or drunk, or running from something personal. The door of a man who had a plan and had arrived at the moment of executing it. Two of them, not one. They moved through the east entrance with the practiced, deliberate confidence of people who had rehearsed this moment enough times that the room felt familiar to them before they had ever set foot in it. Both wore dark clothing. Both wore face coverings. The one in front carried something at his right side, held low and close to his body, and the specific way he held it, the angle of the wrist, the placement of the elbow, the slight forward lean in his posture that distributed his weight toward the balls of his feet, told Marcus everything he needed to know in the first half second. The room had not yet understood what was happening. That lag, the delay between the moment something dangerous enters a space and the moment the people in that space are able to process and classify the information, was something Marcus had studied and used and sometimes survived by. It lasted between 2 and 4 seconds in a civilian environment, sometimes longer, if the people were distracted. In a room full of champagne and conversation and the comfortable assumption that nothing bad was going to happen here because nothing bad ever happened in places like this, the lag was going to be on the longer end. He had, by his own estimate, about 3 seconds before the room understood what it was looking at, and the chaos that followed understanding made everything significantly harder. He was already moving. He left the cart without thinking about it. He moved through the gap between 2 tables along the east wall, using the angle of approach he had mapped weeks ago, and filed away without knowing why, except that his mind cataloged such things and his body trusted the catalog. He was not running. Running in a crowded room with panicking people was inefficient and invited collision and cost you exactly the time you could not afford to spend. He moved with the specific, compressed urgency of a man who knows exactly where he is going and has calculated the fastest path to get there that doesn't involve creating additional problems. The man in front, and the one with the weapon, had reached the center of the floor. He was raising his voice. The words were about compliance, about staying still, about what would happen if they didn't. Standard language, designed for maximum immediate psychological impact. Marcus had heard variations of it before, in contexts where the language was followed through on, and he had learned to process the words as information rather than commands. The second man was moving toward the perimeter of the room, toward the exits, covering the angles. Marcus came in from the northeast from the man's blind side in the gap between where his eyes were and where his attention was focused. This was not luck. It was geometry. The same geometry Marcus had been applying to rooms since before this man had likely decided to rob one. What happened next lasted 11 seconds. Later, much later, when the accounts were being compared and the statements were being given, and the people who had been in the room were trying to reconstruct the sequence for investigators who wanted a linear narrative, the witnesses would disagree on the details. Some said it looked choreographed, like something from a film. Some said it happened so fast they couldn't track the individual movements, only the result. One woman, a caterer who had been near the east wall, said it looked like watching someone do something they had done so many times. It had become something close to instinct. Like watching a man reach for a light switch in a dark room in his own home, without hesitation, without drama, without any apparent awareness that what he was doing was remarkable. 11 seconds. The weapon was secured. The first man was on the floor, not harmed, controlled, held with a precision that was its own kind of statement about the person applying it. The second man, who had moved toward the south exit, stopped when he processed what had happened to his partner and made the calculation that Marcus had already made for him. There was no version of this that was going to end well if he continued. He didn't continue. The room understood now. The room was extremely loud now. In the specific disorganized way of people who have been frightened and are now processing the transition from fear to relief, and haven't quite figured out which emotion is the appropriate one to lead with. Several people were on their phones. Several people were crying. Several people were simply standing completely still with the expression of someone whose entire model of how an evening could go had just been revised without their consent. Marcus was kneeling on the floor next to the first man, who was face down and restrained and not going anywhere. His breathing was measured. His hands were steady. His face had not changed from the expression it had carried for most of the evening. That same calm, that same particular stillness that had been present when he was mopping floors and when he was being addressed by Cassandra Whitfield and when he was watching Victor Hale finish a sentence at his expense. The same face, the same man. The room was only now beginning to understand that these were the same. From his position on the floor, holding the first man steady with an economy of effort that suggested he could do so indefinitely without inconveniencing himself significantly, Marcus turned his head toward the East Service corridor. Eli was standing at the alcove entrance. He had not panicked. He had not run. He was standing exactly where he had been told to stand, in the place his father had designated as safe, holding his spiral notebook against his chest with both arms. His eyes were on his father. They had been on his father throughout. They looked at each other across the floor, the man who had spent an entire evening being invisible, and the boy who had never once stopped seeing him. Marcus gave his son a single, small nod. The nod that meant, "I know. I see you. You're all right." The nod they had developed over 4 years of being the only two people in each other's world. The nod that carried more information in its single motion than most people managed in full sentences. Eli nodded back. He held his notebook a little tighter. He did not move from his spot. Security arrived. Then, 2 minutes later, police. Marcus identified himself, answered the questions asked of him, provided what information was relevant, and made no additional comment. He did not explain himself. He did not perform the moment for the audience that was now watching him with the particular intensity of people who have been forced to reassemble their understanding of another human being from the ground up. Victor Hale was standing 10 feet away, flanked by 2 assistants, watching Marcus speak to the officers with the expression of a man encountering data that does not fit his existing model and has not yet decided what to do with the discrepancy. Cassandra Whitfield was standing near the north wall between her 2 friends. Her champagne flute was still in her hand. She had not drunk from it. She was looking at Marcus with an expression that was not easy to classify, because it contained several things at once, things that could not comfortably share the same face, and were being required to do so anyway. Marcus finished speaking with the first officer. He stood. He walked back across the floor, past the tables that still held half-finished glasses and scattered napkins and the beautiful wreckage of a very expensive evening, and he walked to the East Service corridor where his cart was still parked exactly where he had left it. He paused at the alcove entrance. He looked at his son. "You okay?" he asked. Eli looked at him with those dark, inventory-taking eyes. He looked at him for a long time, the way he looked at things he was trying to draw from life, with complete attention, taking in everything, missing nothing. "I knew," Eli said. "Dad, I knew the whole time." Marcus looked at his son. "Knew what?" "That you weren't just—" The boy searched for the word the way he always did when the thought was larger than the vocabulary he had available for it. "That you weren't only this." Marcus crouched down to his level. He held his son's eyes. He said nothing for a moment because there was nothing to say that would be more accurate than the silence. Then, "Let's go find you somewhere better to sit." He stood. He picked up his cart. He continued his shift, because the work did not stop, and Marcus Cole was, above all other things, a man who finished what he started. It was a detective named Carver who first said the words out loud in a room where people who mattered could hear them. He was a compact man in his mid-50s with the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it and had made a kind of wary, functional peace with that condition. He had been on the job for 23 years. He had walked into a lot of rooms and made a lot of assessments. He walked into the Hale Grand Ballroom 40 minutes after the incident, listened to the initial accounts from 3 different witnesses, watched 47 seconds of security footage on a tablet, and then stood very still for a moment in the way of a man revising something important. He crossed the floor to where Marcus was finishing a statement with a patrol officer, excused himself into the conversation with the quiet authority of rank, and looked at Marcus Cole with the assessing, non-theatrical attention of a professional who was conducting a serious evaluation. "I'm going to need you to wait for me," he said. Not a request, but not unkind. 10 minutes. "Yes." "Sir?" Marcus said. Detective Carver went to make several phone calls. He made them in the service corridor, away from the main floor, speaking in a low voice with the careful precision of someone who understood that the information he was verifying had a specific weight and that weight needed to be handled correctly. He came back in 8 minutes. He stood across from Marcus in the East Service corridor and looked at him with the expression of a man who has confirmed what he suspected and is now deciding how to proceed with the confirmation. "Marcus David Cole," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "SEAL Team 6. 8 years of active service, 4 combat deployments, 3 commendations, 2 of which are classified at a level I was just reminded I am not cleared for." A pause. "Honorable discharge 4 years ago." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere behind them, through the wall, the sound of the ballroom being managed. Voices. Movement. The careful noise of an event being converted from a crisis back into something closer to an ordinary evening. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. Carver looked at him for another moment. "You want to tell me why you're mopping floors?" "It pays the bills," Marcus said, "and it gives me my nights. Your nights. For my son." Carver was quiet. He looked at Eli, who was seated on a folded jacket on a storage crate in the alcove, drawing in his notebook with complete, focused calm. He looked back at Marcus. Something moved behind his eyes that was not part of his professional assessment. "The 2 men you detained tonight," Carver said. "They're going to have significant problems with the law going forward." "I expect so." "The way you moved in that room." Carver paused, choosing the word carefully. "It was not the movement of a man who does this work." A gesture toward the cart. "No," Marcus agreed. "It wasn't." Another pause. "Anyone in that room, any of those security people, any of those very expensive guests, any one of them could have been hurt or worse tonight if you weren't here." Marcus said nothing. "You know that." "I know what would likely have happened, yes." Carver nodded slowly. He looked at Marcus with the expression of a man who had been doing this job for 2 decades and had just encountered something that fell outside the ordinary categories he had built up in that time. Not because it was strange, because it was rare, because the thing he was looking at was a specific kind of man that the world produced infrequently and almost never recognized correctly, and he understood that he was looking at it now, and that the recognition came with a certain responsibility. "I'm going to need a full statement," he said, "but I want you to know something first." He paused. "What you did tonight, the way you did it, that doesn't come from nowhere, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Not by me." Marcus held the detective's eyes for a moment. "Thank you, sir." What Marcus Cole did not say, and what Detective Carver had pieced together from the phone calls he had made in the service corridor, was the full shape of the chapter Marcus had closed 4 years ago when Emily died and Eli was 3, and the life he had built out of discipline and sacrifice and the kind of love that does not require an audience. 8 years. SEAL Team 6. The unit that existed at the end of the selection process that eliminated the vast majority of the candidates who attempted it. The unit that was called when the call was the last call that would be made. The unit whose operations existed in a category of human effort that most people would not believe if you described it to them accurately. Marcus Cole had spent 8 years inside that world. 4 deployments to places that would not appear on the public record. operations that would not appear anywhere, tasks that required a man to be completely functional in conditions that were specifically designed to make functioning impossible. He had done all of it. He had done it well, and he had done it quietly, and when it was finished he had come home and built something smaller and more important from what was left of himself, and he had not told anyone, because no one had asked, and because telling was not something that had ever been part of how he operated. He was telling now, quietly, accurately, to a detective in a service corridor while his son drew in a spiral notebook 20 feet away. The ballroom had not gone back to normal. It had gone to something new, a different kind of awareness, a different quality of attention. The people who had been in the room when it happened were still there. Many of them, because the police had asked them to stay, and they were standing and sitting in the particular configuration of people who have survived a frightening thing together, and are now in the strange social territory that follows shared survival. They had seen Marcus Cole in this room all evening. They had looked past him. They had looked through him. They had, some of them, laughed at him. They had used his presence as a backdrop, as infrastructure, as the invisible machinery that kept the floor clean beneath their shoes while they went about the serious business of being important. And then they had watched him cross a room in 11 seconds and do something that none of the hired security, none of the physically imposing men in expensive suits, none of the people in this room with their resources and their confidence and their sense of how the world was ordered, none of them had done or could have done. Victor Hale was standing near the center of the ballroom when Detective Carver brought Marcus back through to collect his equipment and his son. Hale had the expression of a man experiencing a recalibration, not an emotional one, not a moral one, but a practical one. The expression of someone who has been operating on a set of assumptions about a situation and has just received new data that requires him to revise those assumptions significantly. He watched Marcus walk across the floor. He watched Marcus reach the alcove. He watched the boy stand up and take his father's hand with the easy, natural certainty of someone for whom the world had always been a reliable place. And Victor Hale, who had spent a significant portion of the evening using Marcus Cole as an example of what money could purchase, including the dignity of other people, said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that would not make the situation worse, and he was smart enough to know it. Cassandra Whitfield watched from near the north wall. She was no longer holding her champagne glass. Her two friends were standing beside her, and none of the three of them were speaking. They were watching Marcus Cole walk across the ballroom floor with his son's hand in his and his cleaning cart beside him. And they were watching him with the particular expression of people who have been given, without asking for it, a complete and accurate accounting of what they had done, and what it had cost and what it had been worth to them. It was not a comfortable expression, but it was an honest one. Marcus reached the service entrance. He did not look back at any of them. He did not need to. He had not done what he had done for any of the people in that room. He had done it because it needed to be done, and he was the person who could do it, which was the same reason he had done everything in his life that had mattered. At the service entrance, Eli stopped walking. He turned and looked back at the room, at the chandeliers, at the flowers, at the 300 people who had spent an evening being important, with those dark, inventory-taking eyes that missed nothing and filed everything. He looked at it for a long moment. The way he looked at things he intended to draw from life. Then he turned back to his father and tightened his grip on his hand. They walked out through the service entrance into the cool night air, and the door closed behind them, and the world outside was quiet and dark and full of stars. 3 weeks after the night at the Hale Grand, a letter arrived. It was delivered to the cleaning company's administrative office, addressed to Marcus Cole by full name, and the woman at the front desk held it with both hands when she brought it to him, because it had the kind of weight that makes people handle paper carefully. He read it in the parking lot before his shift, sitting in his car with the engine off and the afternoon light coming through the windshield at the low angle of late autumn. It was from the Department of the Navy. It was not the first letter he had received from them. He had received others, formal ones, procedural ones, the bureaucratic correspondence of a relationship that had officially concluded. This was a different kind of letter. It referenced the events of that Tuesday evening, which had apparently traveled further up certain chains of interest than Marcus had anticipated. It referenced his service record. It referenced the commendations, including the two he had been told when they were given, would not appear on any document he was ever likely to hold in his hands. They appeared on this document. At the bottom of the letter, above the signature of someone whose title occupied 3 full lines, was a single paragraph that Marcus read twice, and then sat with for a long time without reading again. It said in the measured language of official correspondence that what he had done that evening was consistent with the character and training of the United States Navy SEALs. It said that his conduct reflected the highest traditions of his former service. And it said, in language that was formal and careful and had clearly been chosen with great deliberation, that the Navy considered Marcus Cole one of its own, and that it always would, regardless of what he did for work on any given Tuesday night. He folded the letter. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. He sat in the car for another minute or two, looking at the afternoon light through the windshield. Then he went into work. He told Eli about the letter that evening after dinner, while they sat at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where Marcus had stood 4 weeks earlier with 40 minutes until his shift and no childcare, looking at his son and making the decision that had led to everything else. He told him about the letter in the simple, direct way that he told Eli about most things, clearly without excessive drama, with the same respect for accuracy that the boy brought to his drawings. Eli listened. He sat across the table with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes steady on his father's face, the way he always listened when something important was being said. When Marcus finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I see it?" Marcus took the letter from his jacket. He unfolded it on the table between them. Eli looked at it for a long time, not reading all of it. He was 7, and some of the language was dense, but looking at it the way you look at a document when you understand that the document itself, the physical fact of it, carries meaning beyond the words printed on it. He put one finger on the seal at the top. He traced it slowly. "This is yours," Eli said. "Yes. This is from when you were..." He paused. "Before." "Yes. Before me." Marcus looked at his son. "That part of my life was before you." "What I did there?" He paused, choosing the words carefully, the way he always chose words for Eli. "What I did there was for something I believed in. And then you came, and everything I did became for something different, something more important." Eli looked at the letter for another moment. "Were you scared?" he asked. "In those places?" Marcus thought about it. He gave the question the genuine consideration it deserved, because his son asked genuine questions and deserved genuine answers. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes. But you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" "Because someone had to," Marcus said. "And I was someone who could." Eli sat with that. He sat with it the way he sat with everything his father gave him, with full attention, with the seriousness of someone who understood that the things being handed to him were real things, not performance, not simplification. He folded the letter back along its original creases, with a care that was beyond what most 7-year-olds gave to paper, and slid it back across the table. "You should keep it somewhere safe," he said. "I will. Not in a drawer. Somewhere you can see it." Marcus looked at his son. "Why?" Eli met his eyes with the direct, serious quality that had been in them since the night he was born and had never once disappeared. "Because you're good at remembering other people," he said. "But I think you forget about yourself sometimes." Marcus Cole had survived things that had broken other men. He had built a life from almost nothing, twice, once in service and once in grief. He had walked through rooms full of people who had looked past him and told himself, with some success, that it did not matter. He had packed things down and filed things away and converted the heaviest material of his life into the compressed, functional substance of endurance. He sat at his kitchen table across from his 7-year-old son, and he felt something move in him that none of those other things had been able to move. Not the deployments, not the losses, not 4 years of solitude and hard work and being invisible in other people's rooms. "Okay," he said. His voice was level. It was always level. But there was something behind the level that anyone who knew him well enough would have recognized. "I'll put it somewhere I can see it." Eli nodded, satisfied. The nod of someone who has handled a practical matter correctly and can now proceed to the next thing. He picked up his pencil. He opened his notebook. He began to draw. Marcus watched him for a moment. Then he got up and poured 2 glasses of water and set one on the table next to his son's notebook, and sat back down with his own. And they sat together in the kitchen in the easy, sufficient silence that was their particular language, the one they had built between the two of them over 4 years of being all each other had. Outside, the city made its sounds. Inside, the pencil moved across the page. Some time later, Marcus didn't track exactly how long, because he had stopped measuring the peaceful minutes the way he measured the difficult ones. Eli turned the notebook around. He slid it across the table to his father. It was a drawing of a man sitting at a kitchen table. The man was looking at something small in his hands, a folded piece of paper. He was sitting very straight. Around him, the kitchen was specific and recognizable: the counter, the window, the angle of the light that came through in the evenings. The man's face was calm. The man's eyes were steady. Below the drawing, in Eli's block letters, careful and deliberate, "He did it for us." Marcus looked at the drawing for a long time. He did not look away from it the way he sometimes looked away from things that cost him. He looked directly at it. He let it mean what it meant. He let it land where it landed. When he raised his eyes, Eli was watching him with those dark, full, inventory-taking eyes. The eyes that had been watching him all evening at the Hale Grand, watching him absorb and endure and move through the invisible machinery of other people's contempt. The eyes that had been watching him with complete and unwavering attention since the night he was born. "I know you did," Eli said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if it had never been in question. Marcus reached across the table and put his hand over his son's hand and held it there. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean, or said things just to fill silence, or performed emotions he did not fully possess. He had been that way his whole life, in the teams and marriage and grief and the long, honest labor of single fatherhood. The words he said, he meant. The ones he didn't say, he carried a great deal. But sitting in that kitchen on an ordinary Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the night that had changed several people's understanding of who Marcus Cole was, several people's. Not his, because he had always known exactly who he was. He said the thing he said to his son every night before sleep. The thing he had said every night for 4 years without exception. The thing that was the truest sentence in his possession. "I love you, bud." Eli looked at their joined hands. He nodded with the grave, complete satisfaction of someone receiving a thing they already fully knew and were glad to have confirmed again. "I know, Dad," he said. "I love you too." Outside, the city. Inside, the light, and the pencil, and the two of them at the table. Everything that mattered in the world. Present and accounted for. Some men are seen immediately, the moment they walk into a room. The room turns toward them. The room makes space. Some men are not seen until the moment when seeing them becomes impossible to avoid. What happens after that moment? How a room adjusts, how the people in it carry the revision of their understanding forward, says nothing about the man and everything about them. Marcus Cole had known who he was on the night he walked through the service entrance of the Hale Grand Hotel, with his mop cart and his badge, and his 7-year-old son in the East Service alcove drawing in his spiral notebook. He had known it when he was invisible. He had known it when he was humiliated. He had known it when he crossed the room in 11 seconds and did what needed to be done. And he knew it now, at the kitchen table, in the ordinary Thursday evening light, with his son's hand in his, and the letter folded in his jacket pocket, and the spiral notebook open to the drawing of a man who did it for the people he loved. He had always known. The room in the end had simply caught up.